And then, okay. Nope, that's not it. There we go. Okay, can everybody hear me? Cool. Okay. Well, first of all, welcome. This is Writing the Absurd. Just so you know, right off the bat, I have multiple screens going. So if I'm looking over here, it's not because I'm not paying attention to my own workshop. I just have a couple different screens going with the slideshow on my other screen. So yeah, I appreciate everybody being here. I know you had a choice between this or hiking, but I mean, let's be honest, like you could go hiking anytime. How often do you get to be on a Zoom? So kind of a no-brainer to be here. How's SCW going for everybody? Fun? All right. Yeah, that was always my favorite week of the year. So I'm jealous that you get to be there. That's awesome. So my name is Dan Reidmiller. I graduated the MFA in 2019, depending on whether you ask me or the registrar. I write literary fiction, but I also, I write some satire. I've done stand-up for a while and ran my own satirical news website. And just generally, I'm a fan of absurdity and satire. So that's why this workshop exists. And just to give you a little bit ahead of time about the workshop, well, first of all, I want to know who writes what. Like, who here writes fiction? Okay, cool. Any nonfiction? Right on. And poets? Okay, cool. Very cool. Well, so this workshop can apply to any genre. It's really just about opening up your mind and getting you outside of your comfort zone. But I'll be referring to things with fiction terms just because that's what I'm personally used to. But don't mind that if you're not a fiction person, it's totally fine. There's no restrictions on this workshop. The whole thing is just to have fun, like actual genuine fun, and let loose from the kind of serious tones that we tend to write in as literary writers. So what else? Oh, one preface. The stuff that you write doesn't have to be funny, like haha necessarily. It's more about just have like the exhilaration of writing something absurd. So it doesn't have to be funny necessarily, but it can be. But just as a warm up, I'm curious, you've been at SCW for what, like a half a week by now? So what are some funny things that you've seen happen there? Or even not at SCW, just if you're not at SCW, then just something funny that's happened to you in the past week. I'll start just so you guys can think for a minute. I have two nieces, and one of them they're like 4 or 5, and then 7 or 8. And the younger one just learned about syllables and what a syllable is. So she was counting all the syllables in everyone in our family. So she was like, Mommy, Daddy, Uncle Dan. And her sister, Sophia said, well, what about me? And the younger one, without even trying to be funny, looks at her, she goes, me, 1 syllable. So I thought that was pretty funny. Does anyone else have anything funny happen to them recently? No.
I was just sitting, minding my own business, writing, and then a friend of mine, just out of the blue, exclaimed, "Crucifixion is beautiful."
Oh my God.
Okay, yeah, that'll work.
Someone you know.
Okay. Well, that's actually pretty funny because context matters, and that's one thing we'll we'll get to see today, because like anything can be absurd in the wrong context. It's really about juxtaposition. So that's an awesome story. Okay, let's see here. There we go. So just to give you like a preview, because it helps me to have a structure when I'm listening to somebody talk on a Zoom. What we're going to do, we're going to break this into two parts. The first part, we're going to come up with a premise. And in the second part, we'll turn that premise into a story, which isn't as straightforward as you might think. There are some things that I'll give you some advice to help you with that. But first, I'll show you how to do each part, and then you can try it. So if, don't worry about like remembering every single thing we talk about. I'll walk you through it when we go to try it. Okay, so yeah, the first part, the first thing we have to do is pick a topic. You'll each pick your own topic, and don't worry about like, oh, does this fit with the theme of my manuscript for my thesis? Like that doesn't matter at all right now. Just think about something that you actually care about and kind of want to write about. Obviously, it could be like a social or political cause. Because it could be satire. But I would really encourage you to kind of go with something that's a little bit more on like the day-to-day level, something that either annoys you or makes you happy. And one example I wrote down, failure of others to conform to proper gym etiquette. That's like a really cliche one, but I'm going to use it just as an example because it's something, we've all maybe heard of or dealt with. So it's a very basic example. I'm sure you could come up with better examples than that, but we'll work with that one just to see how it all works. Okay. Having selected your topic, the next step that you're going to do is you're going to find the details that make it specific. For example, here I have a guy doesn't wipe off the machine after using it. Right? That's gross. And that's specific insofar as it tells you which piece of gym etiquette somebody's not following. But you really need to dig for the very, very, very specific details. So, for example, you might ask questions like, which machine? Or what type of guy is it? Is it like a meathead? Or is it like a scrawny guy who never has been to the gym in his life? I personally like the latter because it's unexpected. And that always helps with absurdity. But no matter what you choose, it's going to take some trial and error. And you'll notice once you get the right details, it'll kind of click as an idea. And, but it just takes a lot of testing things out. Like I used to actually, speaking of the website I was running, I used to go through my Google News feed and practice flipping like real headlines into absurd premises. Sometimes I'd spend 10, 20 minutes, a half hour on a single headline until I found just the right, like it clicked into place as an idea. So it's going to take, a little bit of trying and failing until you find the right combination. But the point, I guess, of this slide is basically to focus on being specific with your details. Okay, does that make sense? Specificity. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah, so here I have an example. To twist it, you need to do a what if. That's key to really engaging your imagination. So here I put, what if the punishment for not wiping off a machine in the gym was to be held on trial in Geneva for crimes against humanity and then sentenced to a Siberian gulag, okay? And it's really important that you take it to the extreme, because you could say, okay, what if the punishment for failing to follow gym etiquette is you get kicked out of the gym? Like, okay, that makes sense, but it's not extreme, so it's not really funny. You want your what if to be as extreme as possible, and don't worry about like reality or what might actually happen. Just take it to the extreme. Um, okay, so yeah, you have your topic and you get your details, and then you twist it with a what if and make it extreme. Okay, so let's see here. Yeah, so like I was talking about news headlines. News headlines are great for just as like an exercise to make it concise, make your premise concise. Um, and it works for a couple of reasons, which I'll explain in a second. But let's look at the premise and what this one could be as a news headline. I have Geneva Convention sentences Melvin to 10 years forced labor for not wiping off calf raise machine. Melvin expected to develop very sexy calves in Gulag. So it's it's not the most concise headline, but it's more concise than if you wrote it out as a full premise. Um, and what that'll do is um, it'll help you to see right away whether it's funny and poignant or if it's kind of missing something, and then you can go back through and swap out details, maybe change the what if, um, and yeah, it's kind of just a fun exercise in and of itself. And anytime you make the process fun, you're going to make the actual doing of it. A couple things here too that I did. You'll see again specificity. The calf raise machine's funny because it's like a small vanity muscle. You could have picked any machine, but let's say calf raise because it's so stupid and absurd and um, as like a concept. And then also Melvin obviously is kind of like a stereotypical nerdy guy name. It increases the incongruency of the joke. So if you have this really scrawny guy who's in a Siberian gulag forced to do manual labor, it's funnier because he's going to struggle more than if you had like Hans and Franz going to the gulag, right? So, and then also I just added little things like the word "very" for rhythm and for the fact that it makes the joke focus on the calves rather than on the gulag, so it's more misdirection. It's funnier that way. Let's see here. Um, and then, yeah, one important tip I guess I would give is with the twist, you want to make sure the make it incongruous, but still keep it related. Okay, so that there's like a through line that connects both sides of the juxtaposition tightly. So, for example, I have ABC's The Taste signs starving Ethiopian child as season 2 judge. On the left side, we have this cooking reality show, and then the tragedy of the twist is also about food. So it's two things about food that are related but opposite. Okay, so you want them to be related. That's the whole thing. It's like aiming to marry together two things that don't want to be together, and that's what makes it sharp and funny instead of just kind of random and funny. Um, think of like a real life bad marriage. It's kind of hilarious as long as it's not your marriage. But two people who don't want to be together, stuck together, that's kind of funny, or entertaining at least, I guess. And then this I actually pulled from an article, and this was an interview with Scott Dickers. He was the founder of The Onion. And I'd show you this just so you can see, and you can Google the interview with him. They start with an idea and then they run it through each of these boxes, which are kind of like quote unquote filters, until they get one that clicks. And we're doing the same thing with our details and twisting our premise. This is just like a very technical approach to it. And actually, I had my own list. I went through, because I'm such a nerd, I went through and studied all these different Onion articles, and kind of wrote down my own explanation for like what they did to him to make him funny. But obviously, this comes from the man himself. So I wish this had been there before I did all that work. It would have been nice. So yeah, and then this is kind of like an example of how they did it. It's from that interview with Scott. It says, first you start with a premise. Oh, and by the way, when they say premise, they are not talking about the same premise as we are, because they have fewer steps. Their whole thing is the joke is the end goal, whereas that's just our premise. So when they say premise, think of topic, which is what we're starting with. So first you start with a topic, say childbirth is not a miracle. Then you run that topic through each filter, producing different kinds of jokes. Maybe you try out the character filter and get a joke about how God, an expert on miracles, is decidedly unimpressed by childbirth. Scrap that. You try a few more. Finally, you run the premise through the irony filter and get miracle of birth occurs for 83rd billionth time. So that's kind of how their approach to it, just so you can see that you can do it like with a technical approach, even though you're talking about absurdity and humor. There's still kind of a science to it. Okay, time to try it out. So I'll walk you through it. And I'll give you, like 5 minutes for each step, just so you can kind of think about things a little bit. The first thing I want you to do is come up with a topic or idea by thinking about something that either annoys you or makes you happy in your day-to-day life. And if you want, you can focus on like a social or political cause, like I said, but probably the daily life idea is going to be a lot easier to work with. So go ahead and take a few minutes to think about it and jot down some ideas from your daily life, and then kind of pick the best one you want to write about. Because that's, if you want to write about it, it's going to be a lot easier to have fun with it. So I'll give you, say, about 5 minutes to kind of mull that over. Oh, and if at any point anybody gets stuck, totally just let me know, and I can help you brainstorm or help with whatever phase we're on. And remember, just coming up with a general topic. You don't have to do the whole thing just yet. Just kind of think of something that annoys you or makes you happy. Maybe like, um, I get really happy whenever Netflix drops a new season I wasn't expecting, and I turn it on, and it's got the big section right there with like my favorite show on it. Just little stuff like that in your day-to-day life. And I'm just now seeing that we have a chat going. So I may message from before, but thank you. Yes. Have something or a couple of things maybe? Anybody need another minute? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Um, so let's see here. Yeah, so the next step, I want everybody to plug in specifics, use details and swap them in anywhere that you have something vague or generic. So like if you have, um, say, woman or man or person with like what type of woman or man or person, um, and try to swap in everywhere that you have something vague with something specific. So go ahead and take a few minutes to work it over and make it a little bit more specific, this topic that you have. Give it another minute or so here. Okay. So now this is like the tricky part. We're gonna take what you have, twist it, and then make it extreme. So um, remember, come up with like a what if scenario related to the situation you picked, and then take that what if and think of the most like absurd eventuality that could come from that. So remember, we had the gym scenario, and I said, what if bad gym etiquette was a crime? And then we took it to an absurd length and said, like, what if it was a severe crime against humanity, right? So, what if, and then make it absurd. Um, I'll give you some time for that.
Dan, what do you suggest if you're just like, you can't think of anything?
Oh, so as which part? The topic or
Like making it absurd.
oh, okay. So like think of the kind of the opposite of either what's expected or what you have. So like, do you want to share your example and I can
Sure.
okay.
Mine is 70-year-old mother once again discusses her own body and food issues with her formerly anorexic daughter.
Oh, okay. So you're already on. Okay, okay, okay. Let's see here. Um, hmm. So what kind of what ifs have you thought about for that?
I thought about the mom scheduling a spa day at a liposuction clinic for her and her daughter.
That is freaking perfect. Like
It
a
just doesn't
sp-
feel funny enough.
no, well, but here's the thing is like it doesn't necessarily again need to be funny, but also it'll feel funnier if you can make it into which you already kind of started to do like a news headline type thing. Um, but yeah, it's really just about being the two different things put forced together that like just don't go together. So you have anorexia and liposuction. Like that is brilliant. So I would just stick with that. Like and how you word it, we're doing that kind of more or less for fun. But if you have a story about somebody who's anorexic and their mom is like forcing them to like go get liposuction, that's like horrific and also funny. You know what I mean? Like so yeah, I think you're exactly on the right path. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is everybody else how's it coming along? Is anybody stuck? Okay. I'll give you another couple minutes. We'll work on the last step. Okay. Do you guys need more time, or how's it going? Thumbs up if you're ready to move on. Yeah. Okay. Cool. 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 Um, so the last step, and again, like this part's kind of more or less just for fun, um, but let's like turn it into a news headline, just to see if it's kind of well, to really test it out, basically, is what it does. So think about how news headlines are written. We've all read them, I'm sure, in the past 2 years, 4 years, um, and try to give an example of what a news headline might look like if your what if scenario actually happened, like on a local level. Like, what would it say in like the local paper? And it would be, it wouldn't actually be there because it's so absurd, but try to put it in that kind of format. So, for example, Demetri, I worked yours over a little bit, and I put Instagram fitness influencer worried anorexic daughter getting flabby around the eye sockets, schedules liposuction to remove daughter's cheekbones. So it's
That's great.
right. So like it's don't be afraid to like unthink the basics. So like at first when I was thinking about Demetra's topic, I was trying to think too in reality based, right? So like why can't there be, obviously that's not liposuction if they're removing bones, but like that's what makes it funny, right? So um like kind of try to force yourself to disregard reality a little bit, and that'll really help you to like open up the scope of your premise. So and if at any point you get stuck, just kind of give me a shout, and we can kind of brainstorm a little bit and work through it. I will be right back in 2 seconds. Okay, is everybody still working? Need a couple more minutes or a couple more minutes? Okay. Okay, still working, couple more minutes, or are we good? What do you think? Thumbs up, good? Thumbs down, keep going. Good, okay. All right, so now's the fun part. Who's got one that they want to share?
Okay. Oh no. Neighbor readies underground bomb shelter as Boston Bruins get knocked out of the Stanley Cup playoffs, cites fear of making new small talk.
I like that. Hold on 1 second. This Zoom is killing me. That's awesome. I like that. And that'll make for definitely a good story because you could kind of like walk through like what's happening. And yeah, we'll get to that, but that's awesome. Good job. Who else has one? Yeah, go ahead.
We interviewed 500 retail workers and they all want you to eat shit and die.
I love it. That's punchy. I like that. Definitely. And whenever you go to write that, yeah, there's a lot of options with that. Trying to think. Well, yeah, you'll hone in on one. So yeah, that'll work. That's good. Good stuff. And having worked in retail, it's also true. It's not that absurd. I like that. Okay, who else? Yeah, go ahead.
I can read mine. Sorry, I don't have my camera on. My internet's all fuzzy. But I did boy's alligator skin bucket hat reanimates Tuesday morning and causes mass panic in the Florida Panhandle.
I like that. I like that a lot because, yeah, because then there's like animal cruelty. There's Florida, which is always good for absurdity. I always wondered too, like, I think I had one time that was like, what if toilet water made smashed spiders reanimate at 1,000 times the size they started at? That would be scary because you're trying to flush a spider and then it's not going to be happy whenever it's giant. You're on mute, Demetra.
I was just saying, why are you flushing spiders? And you're evil, so.
Well, you don't know. Maybe spiders killed my whole family. Like, you don't know my life, so
That's
don't
true,
judge.
That's true.
Okay. Who else has one?
I have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Local garden club's deer eradication hunt backfires. Zombie deer seen copulating in parks.
There's nothing better than a zombie in the headlines. So that's amazing. That will give you tons of stuff to work with. That's hilarious. Good job. I like that one a lot, actually. Zombie deer.
I'm going to follow that one up because I also have a garden related one.
Okay.
Latest turn of events, eagle and fox community sue beleaguered gardener who took out restraining order on bunny rabbits. Bunny arrests continue for third straight month in a summer marked by unrest and uncertainty.
That is perfect. You really no, because you really used the details and the specific words to form that one because, yeah, the whole premise of it being, there's lawsuits, there's civil unrest, but it's all obviously about animals. That's perfect. And you could write that from two different ways. You could write it as with like an animal narrator, or you could make it a human narrator and they're trying to litigate against these animals. So yeah, you got a lot of options with that one. That's really good. Good job. Who else? Anybody? You don't have to. Okay.
I have another one.
Yeah.
Ecosystem begins consuming Chatham students who are in fact not eco-friendly.
Oh, that's an Eden Hall one. I like that.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, cool. Well, hold on, I have too many windows open here. Okay, there we go. And I have all these screens going. Okay, so okay, so we finished the premise. We all have our premises. Now we're going to get into the story side of it, which is actually flipped from how we did the premise. And it's not straightforward like you might think, but once again, I'll go through, I'll kind of give you some advice and some tips and explain like some good ways that you might want to do it. And then at the end, we should have plenty of time for you to sit and start writing it as a story. And then maybe I'll cut it off and we can share some like a page or two or the opening of your stories if you'd like. So that's kind of how we'll do this second half of the workshop, okay? Yeah, like I said, you have your premises now and it's time to write the story. So there are two ways to approach it. You can either A, lean into your premise and stick exclusively to what's in the headline and just focus on just that as your whole story. Or you can use the premise as a jumping off point and think about tangents that stem from the headlines. So for example, the one about the retail workers, that's a little bit more open. It's not as like closed as a joke. And so maybe you'll focus in on one retail worker and really home in on that. So yeah, if you choose the narrow approach, that's going to be like your whole story. And you'll know where you're headed, which will help if it's a big topic or an open premise. You can, or I mean, a closed premise. It'll be a lot easier because if you get like a big topic, a lot of times it can be hard to figure out like what you want to focus in on. Or it also helps if you're the type of writer who needs a roadmap. It'll give you pretty much the whole roadmap of your story just in the premise, in the joke. Although even if that's the case, you should still feel your way through the story from moment to moment to make sure it flows, even if you have a roadmap. And that will help make it authentic, just like you would in like a literary piece. You would go with those micro moments to really make sure that it feels authentic. If on the other hand, you want to choose the wander approach and wander around, you can really open it up and explore and kind of fly by the seat of your pants. And this is kind of the supposedly more literary approach anyway, but for me, I prefer like a hybrid. So I'll kind of start with a roadmap and use the headline and stick to it as much as possible, but then don't be afraid to veer off of that if you find something in this absurd world that interests you. Kind of go off and explore that. So either way works. It's just all about what you're more comfortable with. Okay. And then whichever one you pick, this is like the key to everything, is to remember that the story is more than the premise. So once you pick, looking at the premise with new eyes from the perspective of a literary writer. So what does that mean? It means that you focus on the story at the heart of the piece and don't only keep harping on the premise and focusing on the joke of it. So if you do that, if you focus on the story, it'll be funnier, right? Because that's actually a technique, is treating absurdity as normal. And that adds a layer of absurdity to it. So it's kind of like a paradox. You don't want to treat the absurd as though it's absurd. You want to treat it like a real serious story, and let the premise do the heavy lifting, if that makes sense. And focusing on the story also, as opposed to just the premise, overall, it's going to make it a lot more powerful because it's going to be doing more. You're going to be doing more than just cracking a few jokes, because if that's all you do, if all you're doing is just aiming for punchlines the whole time, a reader is going to wonder, like, why was this story told? It could have just been a 1 or 2 line joke. So you want to find that narrative arc within your story and within that premise to make it a fully fleshed out story. And then, yeah, something interesting I wanted to point out too, to kind of help clarify what I'm talking about here, is that when it comes to premise versus the story, there's a really big difference, and it's pretty interesting too. So the premise is where you really want to push the envelope, right? Which we've seen with some of your great premises that you shared. But on the flip side, the story is where you adhere to the story logic that you set up in the premise, right? So creating the premise is this wide open exercise, but in turn, that premise restricts the story. So it's a little paradoxical, but it's the best possible way to do it, because, like I said, if you just keep pushing it, then it goes off and it's not a functional story. And we're aiming for like a functional story. Is everybody following that? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, and when you're executing it, there's one last thing to keep in mind, which is the most common mistake people make in satirical, absurd stories is that they end up writing a defense of their own viewpoint, right? And that is really the lowest form of satire. I mean, to be honest, it's trash. Like, if all you're doing is preaching, you do not want to write a parable. You're not trying to teach a lesson. It makes for a lousy story, even in literature, if you think about it. If you have one character who's right about everything and awesome, and you have this flat, villainous character, it's not good art, right? So we're trying to write something absurd, but it still needs to be artistically like valuable and be like an actual literary piece. So instead, what you want to aim to do is write a story with as many gray areas as possible, and really trust the premise, the absurd premise, to do the lifting in terms of satire and absurdity. So search for the truth and treat it like you would a literary piece that you're writing. Does that make sense to everybody? You see what I'm saying here? Okay. Well, and some ways to do that are really focus on making it fair and considering the other side, as ridiculous as it may be. So in the retail example, perhaps you focus a little bit of attention on the customer. Maybe the customer is having a horrible day. Maybe their dog just died, and they're coming up against this retail worker who has had an equally horrendous day in dealing with people throwing stuff at her, or maybe they just found out that they're going to get fired at the end of the day or something. So there should be no bad guys, even though it's satire. There's no bad guys. There's just two different people with different motivations and different goals that come in conflict with one another, crossing paths. Okay, so try to keep that in mind as you're writing your story. From the reader's perspective, if you give equal weight to both sides of quote unquote sides, it'll disarm your reader. It'll make them think, instead of, if all you're doing is trashing one side, then you're just going to make a reader retreat and cling to their own viewpoint, right? So if you want to actually write an absurd story or a piece of satire that achieves the goal of changing people's minds, then you need to be open to their mind in the first place, if that makes sense. Okay. Oh, this is a fun part. So the last sort of piece of advice I would give on flipping your premise into a story is this question of how we actually do it. How do we write a real story when the premise is so absurd, and have it come across in a way that the reader follows along with, right? Because it's easy to lose a reader. I mean, that's the whole game, right? You want the reader to keep reading from one line to the next. So the key as the writer is to see every single detail. And this is going to test your imagination, but you have to see every movement, every bit of logistics, because that's what's going to ground your premise. It's the logistics.